Welcome to Sid and Malcolm. And of course, I'm Malcolm, and with my co-host Sid Mandelbaum, who is expert on everything. But basically, I say that from what you tell me. But as I heard exclusively on malcolmpresents.com, which is a new internet platform, streaming podcasts and Zoomcasts and anything else you want. Anyway, welcome, Sid.
Thank you, Malcolm. And I'd rather be a jack of all trades and a master of none.
Mm.
That way I depend on other people. If you know too much, people won't get involved. And Rock and Wrap It Up is all about having thousands of people share our vision of fighting hunger and poverty. And the only way of really doing that is to have millions of people involved doing it, because it's that bad a malady that's affecting our world, especially our country.
Yeah, the big thing now is, which I'm hearing, especially in California, it's not necessarily food, but water.
It's it again, depending on where you are living, there are shortages. I believe that we have reached a level in this country that we have not been able to go over the hump. And that is for at least the last 30 years, between 30 and 40 million people in the United States, about 10% of our flock, are food insecure. And as much as we've tried, we have yet to go to reduce that number under 30 million. Mm-hmm. And I have some reasons why I believe that is, but the reality is that we have to build into our economy and build into how we live our lives, that we have to take care of 30 million Americans. And Rock and Wrap It Up has found ways that can be done. We are blessed to have a huge number of people in the last 30 years that some of them started out not well known at all, and then they became very well known, and then they lost their stardom, and then they're back to stardom. One of my favorite people is Darius Rucker. Darius Rucker was a college student in the 90s and started a band called Hootie and the Blowfish, which got very big in the 1990s and 2000s. And then the band went down a little bit, had their hits and had their time in the sun. And then Darius reinvented himself in some ways. First, he was a gospel singer as well. And then he went on to become a country singer. And now he's one of the top country singers in the world. And Darius is one of the reasons why Rock and Wrap It Up had reached a level of success in the media. In 1997, Darius was an opening act, one of the few male opening acts, to something called the Lilith Fair, which was run by a singer named Sarah McLachlan out of Pacific Northwest. And Darius was a singer for them. In Cincinnati, Ohio, where Lilith Fair was being put on to tens of thousands of mainly women, there was a TV production by a brand new network at that time called Food TV that had a very small audience. And they went backstage and they wanted to do a program on rock and roll chefs. And as it turned out, the Lilith Fair had a female chef. It was really showcasing women in every aspect. And Darius was interviewed backstage. And after they interviewed the great chef that they had, they spoke to Darius about eating backstage catering. And Darius didn't miss a beat. He says, "You can't do a program like this until you speak to Rock and Wrap It Up, Sid Mandelbaum, because all the food that's left over feeds the hungry on the Lilith Fair across America." Well, I was reached out by Food TV, and they did a 10-minute, which is long special Rock and Wrap It Up. And it was picked up by, of all people, CBS News' Dan Rather. And I was interviewed by Dan's people, and that was picked up by 50 million Americans.
That's not.
That's as big as it gets. He was.
Now, do me a favor, see if you can get malcolmpresents.com and that same network of news.
I think we can. It'll just take a little time.
Okay.
But that helped us get a huge publicity, and we already had some print publicity. We had been written up in Rolling Stone in 1995.
What year was this?
Well, the Lilith Fair turned out to be at the end of '97, but we were on Dan Rather's program on a 4-minute piece, which was huge.
Well, never, yeah.
In 1999 nationally. And that was awesome. But years before that, I had a really nice thing happen. I'm a big Joan Jett fan. And in 1988, I had heard that Joan was going to be playing on Broadway a number of shows in a small theater. And I bought myself a ticket. No one else wanted to go. My wife was home with, at that time, 3 daughters. And I went myself. I drove into the city, parked near the theater. And there was maybe 5 men out of 3,000 women that loved Joan Jett. And there I was, and I kind of moved over to one guy, and we kind of acknowledged each other. Yeah, we're Joan Jett fans, and we kind of hung out together for the concert. And afterwards, I said, I have my truck here. Could I offer you a ride? He says, well, I'm here as a fan, but I work for MTV. I said, what do you do? He says, well, I'm a newsman. My name is Kurt Loder. And he was their first newscaster back in '88. And I said, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to go to an after party with MTV. So I drove him there, and he invited me in, and I really didn't want to go. I was traveling a lot and living in Boston at the time, as well as living in New York. I had 2 homes. We kind of stayed friends. And a couple of years later, I was doing a conference for Nassau County Human Rights Commission, and I had gotten friendly with Branford Marsalis. Branford Marsalis, the brother of Wynton Marsalis and son of Ellis Marsalis, and brother of DeFeo and Jason, and got friendly with Branford. And Branford was a keynote speaker for me at a human rights conference. And I called up Kurt and I said, you asked me if you could ever do me a favor. I said, you can. I said, but not for me. I would love publicity for Branford Marsalis. And it was a strange time for Branford, because he was a little bit on the outs with his brother, who was pissed off at him for leaving the jazz world and going to play for Sting. And he joined Sting's band for a number of years in the early '90s. Well, Kurt Loder did a fabulous piece on our human rights conference, and especially on Branford. And again, a couple of years later, when I launched Rock and Wrap It Up nationally, I reached out to Kurt again. And Labor Day weekend, 1994, it's a long time ago at this point, 28 years ago, seems like yesterday. But Kurt Loder did an amazing piece on the first band to join Rock and Wrap It Up by putting in their contract rider a stipulation that said all leftover food from our backstage catering will feed the hungry, and Rock and Wrap It Up will pick it up. And that band were the Rolling Stones, the first band to join us.
I just a little band.
They're the best in the world. And I really, from that point on, really thanked Kurt, because that really launched us. That got us into some places. And back in the late, around 92, 93, I met Jan Wenner. Jan Wenner was the publisher of Rolling Stone magazine. And one of my friend's cousins was his financial person at the magazine. And Jan said, you know, anything we could do. And Jan put a fabulous piece in Rolling Stone in December 95. And it got us thousands of volunteers to help us explode what we were doing, which was doing food recovery throughout the United States and Canada. So I've really been blessed to have just amazing people that want to do the right thing. And even if they are famous, it doesn't really matter. If their heart's in the right place, it happens. And I'll tell you a great story. At Jones Beach Theater, which was the first theater that we had a presence, we did missionary work there. Their director at that time was Ron Delsner, a very well-known rock impresario. And Delsner allowed me to have a booth back there at no cost at Jones Beach Theater. And we just do what missionaries do. People would come to the booth and we'd tell them our story, how they personally could fight hunger in their communities. We spoke to teachers, we spoke to students, spoke to retired people, we spoke to people in the clergy. And this was all enabled by Ron Delsner giving us that booth. One day, I am speaking to some people and I see this kid, must have been in his early 20s, and he was listening to me. And then he came over on his own when the person left. And he said, "Hi, my name is Jack, and I love what you're doing. Can I write about it?" I said, "Absolutely." And I said to him, you know, there's a band here tonight that's not part of us, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, playing at Jones Beach Theater. And I said, we would love to have them join Rock and Wrap It Up. And he said, well, you know, that's interesting. My father is Graham Nash. And it was Jackson Nash, Graham's son. He went and he spoke to his brother who was managing the tour. And that's how we got into Crosby, Stills, and Nash's contract writer.
Huh?
And then we had another thing happen about 10 years later. Again, we had a booth there from 1992 through now. 30 years, we're still, and hopefully this summer we'll be back. The last 2 years we haven't been able to be there.
Yeah.
The theater was not there, but this year they're going to have probably 30 to 40 shows. I'll have a lot more stories for you on that,
Good.
Malcolm.
Well,
But
maybe you get some of your people to do the show with you.
maybe we could do this right from the booth.
Yeah, that would be great.
But that's something that we could do. So 10 years go by. It's now about 19, thinking maybe about 2002. And again, a kid comes over to me. He was 9th or 10th grade, so maybe 15 or 16. And we're speaking. And it turned out that it was Phil Lesch's son, Graham Lesch. He was in 10th grade, and he did an interview for his father's blog, or whatever they called it at that time. And we have some great pictures of him as a kid. And then I told him about our school program. And it turned out that I was going out in 1992 to I was on the school board of Lawrence Public Schools. And I went out to San Francisco to the National School Board Association meeting in 1992. And while I'm there, Graham asked me to come and speak to his school's principal about starting a food recovery program at Branson Academy, where he attended in San Anselmo, just north of San Francisco. And we did, and we started a Rock and Wrap It Up school program where Graham picked up food and brought the food to shelters in and around San Anselmo. Graham did that for 3 years. And then his younger brother, Brian, did it for another 3 years. So we had 6 years of one of the Lesch boys doing food recovery. And I wound up writing both of them letters of reference. I wrote one letter of reference for Graham, and he got into his first choice, which was Stanford. And I'm sure a lot of other people wrote him letters, but I wrote him a letter, and I got such a wonderful letter back from Phil thanking me for influencing Graham. Go forward a couple of years, and Brian did the same thing. And I write a letter for him. I maybe 5 or 6 letters, but he got into Princeton.
Not bad,
And
not bad.
not bad. And the next year, when he was a freshman at Princeton, he was very thankful, for what we'd done. And I called him up. My son Ryan was a year younger than him in school. So Ryan was a senior at Lawrence High School, and Brian was a freshman. And I said, Brian, have you ever gone to a tailgate party? He said, no, because my father's my father. He really can't go into an area to tailgate, and I think his father was a big 49ers fan or maybe a Raiders fan. And I said, guess what? I have a relationship with the New York Football Giants, at that time, Giant Stadium. Why don't I take you to a Giant game with my son, Ryan, and we're going to tailgate? I drove down to Princeton on a Sunday morning. Phil did me a favor and arranged for my son and his son to go to a Dark Star Orchestra concert later that night at Princeton. So we both took care of our kids that way. Brian had the best time at, I think it was a Giant Raven game. And after the game, I drove him down to Princeton, and my son Ryan and him stayed together that night. Ryan slept over at Brian's dorm, and they both went to see Dark Star Orchestra, which I don't know if you know about Dark Star, but Dark Star Orchestra does all of the Grateful Dead concerts, like the entire concert, every song, every nuance. And they've been doing that now for 20 years.
Are they stoned when they do it?
No. No one in the Grateful Dead ever gets stoned. My son said, Dad, I had the best line. We were listening to the bass player of Dark Star Orchestra, and Brian whispered to me, my father's so much better than him. And the next day I drove down to pick up Ryan, and Phil came down. We wound up going out and having a cup of coffee. And but that was one of the really fun things that have happened over the years. But my best rock story has little to do with me, but has to do with my son Ryan. My son Ryan, when he was younger, was found to have perfect pitch.
Yeah, that's the one you had told that did the was it opera?
Did opera, and he wound up being friendly with the son of Art Garfunkel. James Garfunkel sang with my son. They were both 11 or 12 years old, and they became friends. And I would take Ryan into the city to their apartment, and Ryan would play with him and have fun. And I decided it'd be a cool thing to take all of them to a baseball game. If you remember, at that time, I had just invented a home run measuring system.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of contacts in all sports. Well, I call up Art and I go, Art, I could get us tickets to a Met game. Do you have any teams you like? He says, yeah, I really like the Phillies. I said, great. So I wind up getting 4 tickets for our family. I took my late father-in-law, Herb, and my son, Dylan, and Ryan and I got tickets for Art and James. And there we are. I left the 2 tickets for Art and James at the box office. We're already sitting in our 4 seats. And right before the game starts, Art and James walk in, and everyone's kind of looking at Art, right?
Yeah.
But he's wearing a Phillies hat. His hair is sticking out like Art Garfunkel does. And I get this idea. I said, Ryan, don't call him Art, call him Roger. He says, why? He said, just call out Roger in a good voice. And sure enough, they come closer to us, and Ryan goes, Roger, James, we're over here. And with that, everyone stops looking at him, because it couldn't have been Art if they're calling him Roger.
Unless he has
And
curly hair like Roger Clemens.
he had hair like Art Garfunkel,
Yeah.
but no one bothered us the whole game, even though it was Art Garfunkel sitting among the plebeians. And so Art comes over to me, he says to me, Roger, I says, did you really want him to scream Art out? He said, no, you didn't. That was so
Good. Good thought.
So that was one of the really funny things that happened over the years. But, because we're involved so much in what we do, we really have met amazing people. One of the most amazing people that I met through my work doing Holocaust documentaries was I was always invited to the United States Capitol for Yom HaShoah, which is always done in April. And I would take some of my kids over the years. I couldn't take all of them. But one year I took my son, Dylan, who was about 10 years old. But my kids were always very, very involved with all of our work and knew the stuff we were doing. And the keynote speaker, and they had fabulous keynote speakers. One year they had Clinton, and one year they had Bush. Another year, I wasn't there with any of the Obama years because that was already a little later on. But one year, their keynote speaker was Condoleezza Rice. And Condoleezza Rice was the graduation speaker for Stanford when my daughter Emily graduated in 2002. And this was around 2004. And I think she was a national security person at that time, maybe for George W. Bush. She was a fabulous keynote speaker. I went over to her afterwards. I introduced her to Dylan. She took a picture with Dylan, and I told her what a fabulous talk she did for my daughter's graduation keynote. She was so effusive. Oh my God, thank you for saying that to me. So humble a human being was Condoleezza Rice. Just thanking me for just doing the obvious, just thanking her for what she had done.
Well, you had mentioned the Holocaust, and there was a story in the paper the other day. I don't know about the Ukrainian man who was killed.
Yeah, the 97-year-old, yes.
Who was a survivor of concentration.
Buchenwald, actually. I felt a connection to that because one of the interviews that I had done years ago was a gentleman by the name of Francis Purcell. He was an army liberator, and he liberated Buchenwald. He was there 2 days after the gates opened. So I felt when I had heard that, it was such a horrific place. We're living in difficult times now, Malcolm. There are no real answers. I would love to see this war end immediately, and supposedly President Zelensky has offered not to join NATO, which was a big sticking point why he was invaded. People say a lot of other things, but I know that if I were Russia, I wouldn't want a NATO country right next to me because of, as you may remember, in 1990, Ukraine gave up all of their nuclear weapons to Russia with the stipulation that Russia would never use nuclear weapons on them. And they signed this amazing pact. Well, right now, who knows if that pact has any validity at all? But that's why the Ukraine gave up their weapons. But the Ukrainians, one of the things I have a problem with Zelensky, you know what? He's a great leader for his people. My problem is, first, he always votes against Israel in the United Nations. And that's a problem for me. And I don't know if he does it because there's a large Muslim population living in the Ukraine, which I know they do. But he has not been a supporter of the state of Israel. Yet he goes to Israel to ask them for their support, even though Israel had already given them hospitals and they've given them stuff for their people that are affected, but they're not going to give them weapons. The other thing is that he spoke about how supportive the Ukrainians were helping the Jews in World War II, which was full bullshit. Over 100,000 Ukrainians joined the Nazis to kill the Jews. In fact, Bobby Yar, that had 40,000 Jews killed in 4 days, the majority of the machine gunners were Ukrainians, not Nazis. And that is something that's not talked about. You can't rewrite history to handle a contemporary issue. You cannot rewrite history.
Well,
That's what he wanted to do.
As a group, I'm not sure who supported the Jewish population during the
nobody did in the Ukraine.
Well, not in the United States. They didn't let them come here.
No, very few. In fact,
the Ship of Fools, that movie with
even more current. There was a book written, "The Abandonment of the Jews," and I'm friendly with that author, who just passed away, talking about how Roosevelt himself decided with his advisors not to bomb Auschwitz. And he was asked by Stephen Wise at the time, who was one of the Jewish leaders, to at least make an effort to bomb the railways that are taking Jews into these death camps. And Roosevelt said it would affect the war effort. Our effort is to end the war, and then Jews will not be exterminated. That was Roosevelt's words. And again, wherever we go, we can only depend on the state of Israel at this point. We can't depend on any country, because every country will find reasons before, during, and after their histories why they can't support the Jewish people. So you know what? We can't depend on anyone else.
Well, again, as you know, I'm Jewish, but not everything that Israel does do I approve of, or do I think is right. I understand why they're doing it, some of the things, but I don't necessarily think it's right. And
well, you look, everyone has their own opinions. My feeling is that their neighbors have yet to say there should be a Jewish state.
Right,
and that is a problem, because it was started as a Jewish state in the UN in 1948. It was called a Jewish state, and there was going to be a state next to it for Arabs. It was completely thrown away by the Arab countries, and all of them attacked Israel in 1948, and Israel defeated them. But to this day, they will not accept the state of Israel. So you can't depend on any other country but Israel.
No, well, that's the conundrum that I face, because I realize that even though as you know, that I'm not religious, I'm more culturally Jewish, but I don't, I practice the religious aspect, or certain things, but basically not. But I know, in case there was another Holocaust or another thing, no matter what I feel, they'll look at me and it says, "You're Jewish, you go that line."
Absolutely. Well, this was pretty fast.
Yeah, well, actually, it's time to go now. Well, I think I love these stories. By the way, do you have anything in the coming year? Do you have plans? Are there concerts now, or do you get involved with that? Or
well, we have one group of concerts that we are helping with. Jack Johnson, who's a very well-known singer. We are going to be on his website. We're going to be giving out literature at his concert at Jones Beach. They just made a donation to us, which was great. We are having a fabulous event on June 13th, 6/13/22 at the Rockaway Hunting Club. We're going to be honoring the Fabrizio family. Their Peta Familia sadly passed last year, my friend Nikki Ko Fabrizio. The bus company would always donate buses to us when we would have donations, substantial donations of clothing, uniforms, toys at Yankee Stadium, at MetLife Stadium, and Nikki would give us buses and drivers to go pick it up. So we're going to have a golf outing and a tribute dinner at the Rockaway Hunting Club on June 13th. We want people to buy tickets to it. We'll be sending out literature. There'll be material on our website, fordrockandwrapitup.org. But people have a couple of months, but we would love to get as big a turnout as possible.
You know, as I say, if you ever have anything doing in Los Angeles, let me know. I'd love to participate in there. In the meantime, you have a great week.
Thank you so much. Great seeing you, Malcolm.
I'll see you next week.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.